Welcome to History Where It Happened. I'm Dick Smith, and today we're somewhere in the wilds of Sandgate, I'm told. I have no idea, which is right near the New York border. And we're going to be investigating a settlement site, and that settlement site was for Daniel Shays, the famous Daniel Shays Rebellion in Massachusetts, even though we're here in Sandgate. But I know very little about Shay and Daniel Shay's background. So with us is Steve Butts, who is a teacher, an archaeologist from Cambridge High School, went to Cornell, and is very knowledgeable. And he's also a good driver, and I hope he avoids this wood tree here. But we should learn a lot because we also have some students here that are doing a lot of the archaeological work. So hopefully I'll make it, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes. What is this site, Steve?
This is the mill site, or what's also known as the mill complex, because this is a very large site. There's a lot of buildings here. Up that way is the mill pond, the remnants of the mill dam, and then water would have come down through a sluiceway to the mill wheel here, probably a 6 or 8 foot mill wheel. The mechanism was in the mill building, and then this area here we're calling the mill spillway, which is where most of the excavation has been taking place for the past 3 years with our archaeological field school. Yes. Oh, wow. So we've got a lot of things coming out of the spillway, and including iron artifacts like this.
What is
Excellent. That? Wow, this is amazing.
What
this
is that?
Holy cow, it looks like a horse bridle possibly, maybe, huh? Or a bit? Horse bit, maybe?
Look at that.
That's incredible. Yeah, so this is exactly the kind of thing that we're finding here. And even after 3 years in this one location, we're still
fully intact, too.
Completely intact. That's amazing. And it tells us a little bit more about the history of this place, and possibly that the people that lived here and worked here died off and their things were left here, because this seems to be like a perfectly intact horse bit. Amazing. Excellent job.
That's great.
Our young archaeologists are doing really, really well today. Let's put this over here. And you can see there's other artifacts. Every day we're here with students. We're unearthing all kinds of
do you mark these and then
yes,
or just photograph, or what happens now to these?
Yeah, excellent question. So at the end of the day, we bag everything up and label it, and then we bring it back to the lab, and then we will clean it, and then we will assign it a number. They go into bags, and it's cataloged. We photograph everything, and best to conserve it and preserve it, hopefully for future display in a museum exhibit. That's our ultimate goal.
What is that? I mean, how do you know what that is? To me, it's just a piece of maybe ceramic or something.
Right. No, this is definitely a pipe stem from the 18th century. We find lots of these here, and it's a common thing found at a lot of 18th century sites around the United States. What's interesting about this, we've got a lot of these. We have the pipe bowls, I think, and earlier I mentioned the fact that some of them have resin in them from the tobacco itself. And what's really great about the pipe stems is that the inside diameter can actually tell you a lot about the age of when it was made. The diameters are very clear about, the ones that we're finding here anyway, are about a 1780s date range based on the inside diameter. And that would have been made out of a clay, so the long clay pipe.
Yeah, they probably had a stick in it and then put the clay around it and then remove the stick. That is fascinating. Can you give us a little idea of the process here? I mean, the digging and the sifting and whatever, and the recording, or
Right. So every day we come into a site, we basically plan on where we're going to be excavating, and then we'll assign students a certain area for them to take care of. Usually it's within a square meter. And then they will carefully trowel out the soil into dustpans and searching for any artifacts that they discover right out of the soil. When they fill up their dustpan, then they put their fill into the buckets, and then eventually the buckets are screened over here. So any artifacts that aren't found by direct, contact can then be discovered here. Anything that has been missed. So we have 1/4-inch screens. That is our first pass, and the students will check for artifacts that way. Once the 1/4-inch screening is done, we move it into a pile that's over there, and then eventually that will go through an 1/8-inch screen, so that we're trying to make sure we don't miss any of the artifacts.
Where do you find most of the artifacts? In the first one or the smaller?
Actually, most of them are found directly with the troweling finds a lot of things, but then the 1/4-inch screen we pick up things too. So and we've actually we found a coin here 2 weeks ago from 1787. It was a copper coin minted in Connecticut, and it was actually found in the 1/4-inch screening process. So it just shows the importance of being meticulous with your work when you're doing archaeology.
When he dumps that down here, it looks like it's two different kinds of dirt. It looks one is dark and one is lighter.
Yes.
I don't know if that's
right. Well, that's
any significance, but
it is significant because the upper layers, you got to realize is this site has been abandoned for 200 years, and so being in the northeast, you have leaves that are falling, organic materials building up. So the upper part of the soil layer tends to be darker because of the high organic content, and then as you move down deeper, it turns into a lighter shade of tan, and that interface between the organic layer and the tan layer tends to be where the artifacts are. So that's why you see the color change in the soil. So what we're trying to put together is, was this just a grist mill? There's historical references that I found that refer to there being a mill grindstone here. We have not unearthed that yet. It might have been taken away by a logger, who knows, 100 years ago, but we're still excavating into the mill wheel area, so the grindstone could have collapsed down in that way. We're also trying to figure out, there's a long foundation building over here that seems to be lined up with the mill itself. So was it a dual purpose? Could it have been a grinding mill for processing corn and flour, or also a sawmill? So we're trying to answer these questions through the excavation. But one interesting story, a lot of the artifacts we're finding here are perfectly well preserved, that they wouldn't have been broken and thrown away. And the question is, why would that be? We find axe heads, we find other tools like an adze, actually it's perfect timing because the horse tack we just found is perfectly intact. So why would you throw that away in the late 1700s, early 1800s? The answer is you wouldn't. I mean, it was an important part of life. So the working theory based on the archaeology is that this and other sites were purposely burned. The people that lived here died from the epidemic. It was like a time capsule, and someone actually burnt down the structures. And evidence of that is over here. I can show you, where we've unearthed some actual intact burnt timbers that we're in the process of preserving. But you can see here, so this is a squared off piece of the structure of the mill building itself, and obviously it's been burnt. And then, interestingly enough, this is also the portion of a burnt plank, which is important. You might look at it and say, well, what's the big deal? It's just a charred piece of wood. Well, the squared timber makes sense because they would have cut down logs and then squared them with tools like the adze we found. But the preservation of a plank speaks to the fact that they had to have had a sawmill. So where was the sawmill? They were sawing wood into planks, and that is evidenced by the plank construction here. So this building had planks. In order to get planks, you have to saw them. Was it a pit saw? Was it maybe a mechanized saw that was used here at the mill itself? So these are raising some interesting questions about the way that the settlement was built and how complicated it was.
You could really tell that it was a sawed piece of timber. It's right smooth along that top part.
Yeah, and then, eventually our hope is to also do some carbon dating on a lot of the organic artifacts that we're finding here. We find lots of animal bones as well, which is part of the diet of the people that were here. We can certainly date those. The tobacco pipes that we've been finding also have one of them actually has resin in it from the tobacco itself, which could be carbon dated to figure out, when was that tobacco grown. So there's lots more science that needs to be done here, and it's painting an interesting picture of an 18th century.
It's like putting a puzzle together. I mean, you have to know the whole story, and just an artifact in itself doesn't tell the whole story, but you start putting pieces together. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Steve, now that we have a moment here, could you give a little background of Daniel Shays? I understand this whole Daniel Shays Rebellion involved Massachusetts somehow. Can you give a quick summary of that?
Sure. Daniel Shays, first off, he was a Revolutionary War hero, captain in the Continental Army. And when the war was over, and like other veterans at that time returning home, they were facing this financial crisis in especially Western Massachusetts, where Daniel Shays was from. There was a lot of debt as a result of the war. Veterans were off fighting, so they couldn't run their farms. So when they came home, there was a lot of financial struggle going on.
So Daniel Shays was a farmer.
Yes, yes,
okay,
exactly.
Okay.
Farmer in Pelham, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And so when he returned home, him and his fellow landowners tried to address the Massachusetts government through a series of conventions and petitions to see if they could change things to help veterans out and also farmers. And what really was going on was a lot of people were getting thrown in debtor's prison. They were losing their property as a result of not being able to pay their debts. So it became a real crisis, and it was especially a problem in Western Massachusetts, Connecticut River Valley, although other states were also facing similar crises.
What year was this? This was mid, or no?
This was about 1786 is when it really came to a head. And prior to that, they tried to address it peacefully, but right around 1786, they started to form a militia. And in Massachusetts, it was known as the Regulators.
So the... this time period was after the Revolution, after Yorktown in 1781. Then the U.S. signed the treaty 1783 with England.
Right.
And George Washington was not, inaugurated until 1789. So this was right in the middle of that period. That's interesting.
Exactly.
When the Articles of Confederation or whatever, so.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going on. The states really had more control. The federal government was kind of, putting itself together, so there was not a lot of oversight from the federal government, and it left a lot of gray area, especially for the financial crisis. And so Daniel Shays became the leader of the Regulators, and the Regulators would go to court sessions that were all throughout Massachusetts. Whenever there was a court session, they would show up with they were an armed militia led by Daniel Shays and other leaders of that were also fellow veterans and captains that served in the Continental Army, and they would break up the court sessions and release their fellow farmers from being incarcerated, or if they were going to be tried, they would break it up. And this happened from 1786 to 1787 all throughout Mass, and eventually the Massachusetts governor, Governor Bowdoin, wanted to put an end to it because obviously it was an uprising,
right.
And it had been peaceful up until that point.
How many people were involved when you say an uprising in Massachusetts?
Right. It's interesting. The Regulators themselves grew to about 1,500, armed,
right.
And the militia was really they trained actually, and Daniel Shays was part of that. They drilled.
Substantial.
It was a very large force, and they took over many court sessions in major towns all throughout Massachusetts. And really, it was almost like a class war, because you had the inland farmers of Western Mass against the merchants of the east coast of Boston, in Boston, Massachusetts, and it was kind of a class war in a sense. Dick, this is a site that I'm calling the Trip Hammer Mill. There's reason to believe that this could have been a blacksmith's forge with a trip hammer for doing all the blacksmithing for the settlement. And the reasons why I believe that, we have a deep cellar hole here and essentially a large chimney. So this was basically a building that surrounded a fireplace. Also, if you look around here, there's an abutment wall that is built right along the creek. So they purposely put this structure right next to water, and that makes sense that they were using the water for some type of power. And commonly back then, a trip hammer was used to forge iron. So there would have been a wheel that was powered by the water, and it would be triggering a large hammer that would be tripping on a cog and being used to forge iron.
What do you think they were? What would someone forge here? Some products to sell, or just for their own use, or a combination, I guess?
Right. It could have been anything from nails. There's a lot of nails that we've found up here. Obviously, very important for the construction of the settlement. Maybe simple tools. Could be horseshoes. I mean, all of the aspects of
horseshoes.
18th century life that were needed and were made from iron. But you can really see that basically this is just one large chimney structure that would here. Now the chimney has collapsed into the cellar hole. We've done no excavation here yet. This is a real shady site, so it tends to be wet. So we're waiting on that. We have to remove the rock out of the cellar and restore the chimney back before we can get into excavating here. But that's planned for the future. And then it all came to a pinnacle in 1787 when the regulators marched, and it was a brutal winter, led by Daniel Shays, and they were going to attack the Springfield Armory in Springfield, Massachusetts.
And that was a federal armory.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So it was a brutal winter. They needed supplies, they needed ammunition, and they were going to take the armory. And
what happened?
Finally, the governor was able to raise a militia from Boston, and they were led by General Lincoln, who was also he commanded Daniel Shays during the Battle of Saratoga, so they knew each other. So they sent a force of Massachusetts militia to guard the armory, and the regulators marched on the armory, and they knew it was going to happen. No one knew who was going to shoot first, if they were going to shoot. Up until that point, the regulators were all peaceful, and everyone broke up the court sessions without any shots fired.
Right.
But at this point, they marched at the armory, and the Massachusetts militia fired a warning shot over them to break them up. They didn't stop, and then eventually it just broke open into an actual battle.
Did anybody die?
Yes, there were 4 regulators killed. There was 1 Massachusetts militiaman who was injured.
Right.
Then after the battle started and there were shots fired, they broke up and everyone fled. The regulators actually retreated.
Right. That's interesting. Just a little trivia. One thing I know that Lincoln, Vermont is named after Benjamin Lincoln, not Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
So I didn't mean to interrupt your story.
No, that's Benjamin Lincoln. He was in charge of the militia, and for sure. And then so that broke up the rebellion essentially. And as a result of that,
so they left Springfield, and
a lot of the so at that point there was about 1,500. They all broke apart, and a lot of them returned to their homes. But then a few of the core members were still together with Shays and being pursued by the Massachusetts militia.
So they must have been outlaws. Was there a bounty on their head, or were they just?
There was a bounty. They actually, and Daniel Shays and the other ringleaders were wanted for treason. But eventually Governor Bowdoin did create a treaty with the rest of them and absolve them. He basically said, look, if you agree to go back to your homes and peacefully just go about your business, we'll forget about your participation in the rebellion. And they had to sign an oath of an allegiance to the state of Massachusetts saying that they took place in the rebellion, but they wouldn't be part of it anymore. And as a stipulation is interesting, by signing that, and about 800 of them did sign the proclamation,
stipulation.
Yeah. And they couldn't serve as a tavern owner, teach school, or vote for 3 years. And then after that,
interesting.
Yeah.
So it was basically, the rebellion was basically over itself in what you said, I forget, you said February, early 1987.
1787, yes.
1787, yeah.
Exactly, and that's when it ended. And most people got out of it, but Daniel Shays and his other leaders of the rebellion, including Adam Wheeler, Eli Parsons, Simeon Hazeltine, were all still wanted specifically for treason. So the amnesty was not given to them. So the Massachusetts militia fled after them. They were trying to apprehend them, and they eventually worked their way into Vermont.
Okay. We're now at the site, I guess it's referred to as the fort site within the entire settlement. And Steve, if you can kind of give us a brief history or what we're looking at and why you think it's a fort and so on, that'd be really helpful. This is fascinating.
Yeah, the fort site is one of the first areas that was located as far as the settlement goes. This is really a focal point of the settlement. It's roughly a 100-foot by 100-foot enclosure. Stone wall goes all the way around. And this corner right here is the heavily fortified portion, which overlooks the road. And
you mean that wall, the
yes,
wall down there?
Exactly,
okay, yeah.
The wall going all the way around. And if you look at the wall, if you compare that corner of the wall on this side to the back side, you can see that that one was definitely bolstered up. And it makes sense because we're overlooking the road. So this would have been the main road of the settlement. And if the regulators were being, attacked by the Massachusetts militia, they would have retreated to here and had a very nice defensible position. And then the interior is a little central foundation here of a building that has been referred to in historical documents as a blockhouse, which could have been, part of the fort structure. There's also some possibility that this might have been a central meeting house for the settlement in the past.
Well, in the French and Indian War, a lot of the forts were blockhouses, so that's very logical.
Right. And as far as the archaeology goes, we really haven't done much work here. We did a couple test excavations just to see what was going on. But the nature of the site is large. But in the future, we definitely hope to learn more about the settlement from excavations here as well.
How long would you think? I mean, this is a out of the blue question, but how long do you think it would take to build a fort like this? I mean, it's maybe a summer, I mean, with the wall, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And interestingly enough, related to Daniel Shays, he actually helped build a fort during his time in the Continental Army as a captain. He built Fort Putnam, which is near West Point. So he had some knowledge of fort construction, and the time it took, it's amazing the work that was done here. I mean, they put this settlement together, as you've seen from the other sites, the foundations, the amount of stone that they needed to move, and not knowing exactly how many people were here, 100 or so. And I think that they probably would have put this up first because this was their main concern of protecting themselves when they first were here hiding from the Massachusetts militia. So maybe it was put up in a couple weeks.
That's true. Also, if winter's coming, you can work pretty fast, if you know that.